When it comes to rice production, we think of countries on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. But the United States contributes to the rice world as well. Although there's only a handful of states, California is number 2 on that list. And we have Dr. Bruce Linquist of the University of California on with us. So I guess let's start out with an overview of rice production across California, but then also the United States.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Rice is grown primarily in the southern U.S., in the Mid-South. Arkansas is the biggest producer of rice in the U.S. About 50% of rice comes from Arkansas. California is the second largest producer of rice with about 20%. And then other states that are producing rice include Texas, Missouri, Mississippi, and Louisiana, all producing rice. There's a little bit in South Carolina and Florida as well, but those are the main states. It's unique in a number of ways. One is it's eaten as a full grain. In many cases, your wheat, your soybean, your corn, you're grinding up those products. So a lot of what's important in rice is the whole grain quality. And a lot of practices, especially at the end of the season, are targeted to get good quality in your grain so it mills properly and you're getting a lot of whole grain. You don't get a lot of chalkiness. You want translucent rice. So yeah, there's some unique practices to rice, and because it's a whole grain, it's important to keep those quality factors in mind.
When it comes to rice production, take us from the time that it's planted to whenever it's harvested, and is there any special way to that harvest?
Okay, I'm going to keep it broad here, not just California, but broadly, rice in the Mid-South and Louisiana, they can be harvesting or planting, as early as they could be planting in February. Here in California, we're typically planting in May. So there's a fairly broad harvest window or planting window, with harvests usually starting either in August, and here in California, we're still harvesting and we're into November. It's a late year for us to be harvesting. It's not really good. The other thing is that a big difference between the southern U.S. and California is they plant rice very much like they would plant a corn crop. They drill seed rice, and then after about a month, they would come in with a permanent flood until the end of the season, where they drain it for harvest. That's called dry seeding or drill seeding rice. In California, we water seed. We flood the field, and then we aerially plant seed into that standing water. And typically the field will remain flooded for much of the season until about 3 weeks before harvest, when it's drained to allow combines onto the field. So the fields are harvested. Well, they might be a bit muddy, but they're harvested with combines, with conventional equipment for rice.
And I'm sure there's a lot of folks that want to know, why does the rice field remain flooded throughout the growing season?
The main reason why they flood rice is weed control. Water controls a lot of problematic weeds, especially some of your grasses. Still, grass weeds are a problem, but it's really toward a weed control.
I was talking with a rice producer in Missouri one time, and he explained that it's actually the soil type that makes a good rice crop. I guess give us an overview on why a clay may work better than a sandy soil.
Well, if you don't want to use a lot of water, you need to keep your fields flooded. So you need a soil that's going to hold water. And that can be a real challenge in sandy soils, obviously, especially if you don't have a lot of water being applied. In California, we're very fortunate. A lot of our soils are very heavy clay soils, very little downward percolation in those soils. So you're able to keep a very good flood on those fields without losing a lot down into the ground below the root zone.
So what is it about certain areas of California that work best for rice production and variety selection as well?
Yeah, I'll stick to California on this one. I don't, I mean, I don't want to get um, too out of my league down there. I'm somewhat familiar with it, but I'm going to stick with California here. And in California, it's a bit unusual compared to the South. Most rice fields, they continually grow rice. So rice farmers are rice farmers. They're not rotating with other crops like they do down in the South. In the Mid South, they'll rotate with corn, soybeans, and other crops. Here in California, it's a rice following rice. So primarily, rice fields are rice fields. They tend to be these heavy clay soils that aren't really good for other crops. Now, there is some rotation here in California on some of the better soils, but you really want the ability to hold water. In terms of picking a variety, we have a relatively short growing season here in California compared to the Mid South. So we don't want our varieties to be too long. Otherwise, we're going to get into the fall. We're very fortunate to have a very dry summer. We almost get no rain during the summer, but we do get some rain potentially coming in the fall, which can delay harvest. So we'd like to be out of the field really usually by the end of October. We want shorter duration varieties that you can get out. Then we like to plant a little bit early. And there are areas in California where blast is a problem. So you'd like, in those areas particularly, you'd like to get some blast resistant varieties, which we have available to those growers.
Earlier you mentioned that the water actually helps with weed control. Do you see any weeds that actually do make it through the flooding of the field and impact the rice production?
Yes, I mean, weeds remain the number one problem for us in most of rice production. You're always battling weeds. Grass weeds are a problem. It's your aquatic weeds that really sedges, and you got duck salad and arrowhead, a lot of sort of these aquatic weeds that really do well in the flooded situations. They tend not to be as competitive as some of the grass weeds, but still you've got grass weeds. It's very easy for grass weeds to get out of control, and they're going to be your real problem. This year, watergrass is always a problem. And this year it remains so, yeah.
Do you see any insect pressure with the crops? Any other aside from weed pressure in the rice crop?
You know, we're super fortunate here in California. We have very little disease and insect pressure, given our climate. I will say that armyworms can be a problem in some years. It wasn't a problem this year. We have tadpole shrimp in these water-seeded systems that will eat the young roots of emerging rice roots as they're emerging in the water. So tadpole shrimp can be a problem, and seed midge could be a problem on the insect side. Diseases, again, relatively few diseases. We have very warm, dry summers, not really conducive to a lot of diseases, but aggregate sheath spot, stem rot, and blast are all there and can be problems in certain years.
So once the rice crop is harvested in California and other states, what happens after that? Does it automatically get on a ship, or is it stored?
Well, it goes into so once harvested, it's taken to a dryer facility. It's dried down and stored in those facilities, and then over the next year, those companies that own the dryers and storehouses will be selling that rice. It stores fairly well.
A couple of years ago, we saw a pretty sharp decline in planted acres of rice across the United States. What did that come from, and do you see a continuing rebound in planted acres of rice?
I assume we're talking about California here. So, yeah. Last year, 2022 actually, was our lowest year in acreage since the 1950s. It was about 250,000 acres, which is about half of what we would typically consider to be normal. So we were really down from that, and that's due to drought here in California. All of our, or the bulk, probably 90% of our irrigation comes from surface irrigation. We get rainfall, snowpack in the Sierra Mountains. That's captured in reservoirs, and then it goes out to these various irrigation districts through canals and supplies a lot of agriculture with water here. But with the droughts in prior to 2022, there was very little water available for growers. And so a lot of the water that even was available gets sold or transferred to grow other crops that are common here in California, like tree crops, orchard crops that, you can't have a year without water for those. There's a lot of investment there. So last year we were super low, but we got really good rains this past winter, almost a record rainfall, not quite, but it was very high. Got very full reservoirs, and so acreage was up to over 500,000 acres this year. So a really good year in terms of acreage for California.
One of the great things about doing the AgNow Roundup, I get to talk with university folks from around the country, and whether it be extension or research, everybody's working on something. And what are you working on for the rice growers of California and parts of the country?
Yeah, so my specialty is in sort of cropping systems, nutrient management, and that type of thing. So on my side, we're looking at ways to reduce water use. So we're looking even at stuff like no-till farming, which is very new. It would be a no-till drill-seeded type of system where you can conserve a significant amount of water. We're looking at nitrogen application management in years where water is very difficult to control. When water is difficult to control, you have losses of nitrogen are very high. So looking at some of that. Other research, looking at the breeders are looking at blast resistance, shorter duration varieties that fit within our smaller window and also use less water if you're a short duration variety. And then continually trying to keep up with weeds. A lot of work going on and just weed management and that type of thing.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bruce Linquist with University of California, for going on with us and talking about rice production in California, but then also parts of the United States.
Thank you.